The Price of Silence. Part 1. The Gift. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen curtains, casting golden patterns across the marble countertops Isabel had cleaned just an hour before. She stood at the window, watching the driveway, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had long since gone cold. Today was her 62nd birthday, though no one had mentioned it yet. Her son Marcus was arrived soon with his wife, Vivian. They visited every Sunday, like clockwork, not out of love, Isabel had come to understand, but out of necessity. Financial necessity, to be precise. She heard the car before she saw it, that low, expensive purr of Vivian's Mercedes. Isabel set down her mug and smoothed her simple cotton dress, the kind she'd worn for decades. Why buy expensive clothes when there was no one to impress? Marcus had made that clear enough over the years, introducing her at social functions as just mom, while Vivian sparkled beside him in designer everything. The front door opened without a knock. They never knocked. Mother? Marcus's voice carried the same flat tone it always did, that perfunctory acknowledgement of her existence. He was 40 now, with silver threading through his dark hair, wearing a suit that cost more than Isabel's monthly expenses. Vivian followed, her heels clicking against the hardwood like a countdown. She was beautiful in that sharp, calculated way, every hair in place, every gesture rehearsed. Isabel, not mom, never mom, just her name, spoken like a social obligation. I made breakfast, Isabel said, gesturing toward the dining room where she'd laid out pastries from the bakery she loved, the one 3 miles away, because it was cheaper than the fancy place in town. We already ate, Vivian said, not even glancing at the food. She settled on the sofa, crossing her legs, her designer bag, new, Isabel noticed, placed carefully beside her like a small, expensive pet. Marcus sat in the armchair that had been his father's favorite, the one Isabel still couldn't bring herself to replace, though David had been gone for 8 years now. Her husband would have seen through all of this, she thought. David would have stopped it before it started. You need to talk about your finances, Mother, Marcus said, pulling out his tablet. This was how their conversations always began now. Never, how are you, or what have you been doing, just straight to the money. Isabel lowered herself into the chair across from him, her back straight despite the weight of exhaustion that never quite left her anymore. What about them? Your portfolio is too conservative. You're losing potential gains. He swiped through screens, not looking at her. I've told you before, you need to be more aggressive with your investments. This was the dance they did. Marcus, the successful financial consultant, explaining to his ignorant mother why she needed to restructure everything again. The restructuring always seemed to benefit him more than her, but Isabel had learned long ago that questioning him led to hours of condescending lectures. The investments you recommended last year lost money, Isabel said quietly. Marcus's jaw tightened. The market fluctuates. You don't understand these things. I understand I had more money before you started managing it. Vivian laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Oh, Isabel, Marcus went to Wharton. I think he knows a bit more about finance than someone who spent her life making casseroles and volunteering at church. The words landed like slaps, but Isabel had developed thick skin over the years. She'd had to. I'm just saying, you're not saying anything, Marcus interrupted, his voice sharp now. You're questioning my professional judgment, which is insulting considering everything I do for you. Everything he did for her. The phrase was laughable. What did he do exactly? Visit once a week to pressure her into investment schemes? Call on holidays with his hand out? Treat her home like an ATM with sentimental furniture? But Isabel bit her tongue. She always bit her tongue. There's something else, Vivian said, leaning forward with that predatory gleam in her eye. We need to borrow some money. You borrowed $40,000 last month for your business expansion, the business that had yet to turn a profit, that existed mainly as an excuse for Vivian to buy expensive things and call them business expenses. That was last month. Marcus said, as if the distinction mattered. "This is different. It's an investment opportunity. We need 100,000. The number hung in the air like smoke. $100,000. Isabel thought of her father, who'd worked in a factory for 40 years and died with $1,200 in his savings account, thinking he'd failed his family. She thought of David, who'd built his construction business from nothing, who'd saved and planned and invested carefully so that Isabel would be comfortable after he was gone. That's a lot of money. "You have it," Marcus replied. Not a question, a statement. He knew exactly how much she had because he'd convinced her years ago to give him access to all her financial information for efficiency, so I can help you better. "I need to think about it." "Think about what?" Vivian's voice rose, that edge of hysteria she employed when she wasn't getting her way. "Marcus is your son, your only child. You'd really deny him this opportunity?" "I didn't say I'd deny." "You might as well have. You know what? I'm tired of this. Every time we need help, we have to beg. We're family, Isabel. Family helps each other." The irony of that statement coming from Vivian, who hadn't worked a real job in the 5 years since she married Marcus, who spent money like water and expected Isabel to be her personal bank, it would have been funny if it weren't so painful.
"Vivian, please sit down," Isabel said. "Let's talk about this calmly." "There's nothing to talk about. Either you help your son or you don't." Vivian looked at Marcus. "I told you this would happen. Your mother doesn't care about anyone but herself." Isabel felt something crack inside her chest. After everything, after raising Marcus alone when David worked 70-hour weeks to build their future, after sacrificing her own career dreams to be there for every school play and soccer game, after putting him through college while working 3 part-time jobs, after all of that, she was selfish? "I'll transfer 75,000. Isabel heard herself say. The words came automatically, the way they always did. The path of least resistance. "That's all I can manage right now." Marcus's face showed no gratitude, only a slight nod of acknowledgement, as if she'd simply done what was expected. "I'll need it by Tuesday." "Tuesday? Marcus, that's... Do you want us to lose this opportunity?" He stood, straightening his tie. "Time-sensitive investments wait for no one, not even for your hesitation." They left the way they came, without saying goodbye, the door clicking shut behind them with a finality that echoed through the empty house. Isabel sat in the silence, staring at the untouched pastries, the coffee going cold in her abandoned mug. Through the window, she could see her car, the old Honda Civic she'd been driving for 15 years. It ran perfectly well, though Marcus never missed an opportunity to comment on it. Embarrassing, he'd called it once, at a family gathering where all his friends had seen her arrive in it. She thought about the $100,000 she'd just refused, and the $75,000 she'd agreed to give. She thought about all the money over the years, the loans that were never repaid, the investments that never materialized, the constant pressure to give more, do more, be more generous with people who showed her no generosity in return. And she thought about David, who'd made her promise on his deathbed to take care of herself, to not let anyone take advantage of her. "I'm sorry," she whispered to his memory. "I don't know how to say no to him. He's our son." But even as she said it, she knew something was wrong. This wasn't motherly love. It was fear. Fear of losing him completely. Fear of being alone. Fear of admitting that her relationship with her only child had become nothing more than a series of financial transactions. Isabel walked to the window and watched a bird land on the feeder she'd hung last spring. It pecked at the seeds without hesitation, without fear, taking what it needed and flying away. When had she stopped flying? When had she become so small? Part 2. The breaking point. 3 weeks later, Isabel sat in her financial advisor's office, staring at numbers that didn't make sense. "I don't understand," she said, pointing at the statement. "Where did the $200,000 go?" Gerald Morrison had been David's financial advisor and friend for 30 years. He was one of the few people who continued to check on Isabel after David died, who actually seemed to care whether she was okay. Now his face was grave, his usual easy smile nowhere to be found. "Your son withdrew it," Gerald said carefully. "You have power of attorney for your accounts."
The words hit Isabel like ice water. What? No, I don't. I never gave him power of attorney. Gerald pulled out a document, sliding it across his desk. There was her signature at the bottom, right next to Marcus's. The date was from 4 years ago. You signed this, Gerald said gently. It gives Marcus the authority to make financial decisions on your behalf. Isabel's hands shook as she picked up the paper. She remembered that day now. Marcus had brought over a stack of documents, said they were for estate planning, for making sure everything was in order just in case. She'd trusted him. She'd signed without reading carefully because he was her son, because he was a professional, because she'd never imagined. This is wrong, she whispered. Gerald, this is wrong. I didn't understand what I was signing. I believe you. And his voice held a weight that frightened her. Isabel, I'm going to be honest with you because David was my friend, and I know he'd want me to protect you. I've been watching your accounts for the past 3 years, and I'm very concerned. Very concerned. He pulled out more statements, spreading them across the desk like evidence at a crime scene. These withdrawals, he said, pointing, 200,000 last month, 90,000 the month before, 50,000 before that. It's been happening regularly, always below the threshold that would trigger automatic reviews. Your son knows exactly what he's doing. Isabel felt nauseous. How much? Total, over the past 4 years, approximately $2.3 million has been transferred from your accounts to various accounts controlled by Marcus and his wife. The number was incomprehensible. $2.3 million. That was most of what David left her. That was her security, her future, the money that was supposed to last her lifetime. There's more, and his voice held a weight that Isabel gripped the arms of her chair. Some of these transactions appear to be fraudulent. Money transferred to shell companies, investments in businesses that don't seem to exist. Isabel, I think your son has been systematically stealing from you. The room spun. Isabel closed her eyes, trying to breathe, trying to think. This couldn't be happening. Marcus wouldn't do this. He's my son, my baby, the child I'd rocked to sleep, nursed through illnesses, loved with every fiber of my being. What can I do? She asked. First, revoke the power of attorney. Today, I have the forms ready. He handed her another document. Second, you need to talk to a lawyer. What Marcus has done, if my suspicions are correct, it's not just unethical, it's criminal. Criminal. The word tasted better. He's my son, Gerald. I can't send my son to prison. He's been stealing from you for years, Isabel, and from what I can see, he's not planning to stop. He leaned forward, his eyes kind but firm. David made me promise to look after you, so I'm telling you what he would tell you. This has to stop. Now, before there's nothing left. Isabel signed the revocation, her hand shaking so badly she could barely write her name. Then she sat in her car in the parking lot for an hour, unable to drive, unable to think, unable to process the magnitude of what she'd just learned. Her phone rang. Marcus. She stared at his name on the screen, that picture she'd taken of him at Christmas 2 years ago, when he'd smiled for the camera while Vivian complained about the dinner Isabel had spent 2 days preparing. She didn't answer. He called again, then a text. Mother, I need to talk to you about an urgent investment opportunity. Another text. Why aren't you answering? Another. This is important. Call me immediately. The audacity of it, that he was still trying to get more money, even now, it sparked something in Isabel that had been dormant for years. Not just anger, something hotter, brighter, more powerful. Fury. She drove home in a daze, her mind replaying every transaction, every request, every manipulation. How many times had he said he'd pay her back? How many times had she believed him? How many times had she sacrificed her own comfort, her own security to give him what he wanted? When had she become so disposable to him? At home, Isabel walked through the house she'd shared with David, seeing it with new eyes. The furniture they'd chosen together, the photos on the walls of Marcus as a child, smiling genuinely then, before something had twisted inside him. The wedding photo from Marcus and Vivian's ceremony where Isabel had paid for half the reception because Marcus claimed they were short on funds. She'd paid for her own humiliation.
In David's study, she opened the filing cabinet where he'd kept all their important documents. There were files for the house, for insurance, for investments. And there, in a folder marked, "For Isabel, important," she found a letter in David's handwriting. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. "My dearest Isabel, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I'm sorry I can't be there to help you navigate what comes next. But I need to tell you something I should have said while I was alive. I'm worried about Marcus. I've watched him over the years, seen how he treats you, how he always has his hand out. I've seen the way Vivian looks at our money, our things, like she's already spending them. I wanted to believe I was wrong, that my son was better than this. But a father knows. I made sure your inheritance is structured to protect you, but I know you. You're too kind, too generous, too willing to sacrifice yourself for the people you love. So I'm asking you, begging you from beyond the grave, don't let Marcus take advantage of you. Don't let anyone make you small. You are the strongest woman I've ever known, Isabel. You raised our son while I was working. You built our home. You made our life beautiful. Don't forget who you are. If Marcus is treating you poorly, if he's using you, you have my permission, not that you need it, to stand up for yourself, to say no, to walk away if you have to. I love you forever. Be strong. Be you. David." Isabel read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. David had known. He'd seen it, even before it got this bad, and he'd tried to warn her. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I should have listened." But it wasn't too late. It couldn't be too late. She picked up her phone and called a number she'd been avoiding for weeks. The lawyer Marcus had yelled at her for even consulting, claiming she was being paranoid and disrespectful. "Hello, this is Isabel Thornton. I need to make an appointment. As soon as possible. I think my son has been committing fraud." The words felt like liberation. Part 3. The Unraveling. The confrontation happened on a Sunday because that's when Marcus always came. Isabel had planned it carefully, with a clarity of purpose she hadn't felt in years. She'd changed the locks. She'd moved her most valuable possessions to a storage unit. She'd met with her lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Chen, who'd looked at Isabel's documentation and said, "Oh, honey, we've got him." Now Isabel waited in her living room, dressed in her best outfit, not to impress, but to armor herself. When she heard the car in the driveway, she didn't move to greet them. Let them knock. They did, after trying their key and finding it didn't work. Marcus's knock was impatient, demanding. Isabel opened the door but didn't invite them in. "Mother, what's going on? Why doesn't my key work?" Marcus's face was annoyed, not concerned. That told her everything. "We need to talk. Out here." "Out here? Don't be ridiculous. It's cold." Vivian pushed past her, or tried to, but Isabel stepped into the doorway, blocking her. "I said, out here." Something in her tone made them both stop. Isabel saw confusion flicker across Marcus's face, the first crack in his usual arrogance. "What is this about?" "It's about $2.3 million. It's about fraud. It's about you stealing from me for 4 years." The color drained from Marcus's face. Vivian's eyes went wide, then narrow. "That's insane," Marcus said, but his voice was too loud, too defensive. "I've been managing your investments, Mother, you know that." "Managing." Isabel pulled out the folder Patricia had prepared for her. "Is that what you call transferring $200,000 to a shell company last month? Is that what you call forging my signature on loan documents? Is that what you call embezzling from your own mother?" "Embezzling?" Vivian's voice rose to a shriek. "How dare you accuse us of—" "I have documentation." Isabel cut her off. "Bank statements, transfer records, emails between you and Marcus discussing how much you could extract from me without me noticing? Would you like to see them?" Marcus's face had gone from white to red. "You've been spying on us?" "I've been protecting myself." Finally, Isabel looked at her son, this stranger in her son's body, and felt a grief so profound it nearly knocked her down. But she stayed standing. "I stole from you, Marcus. For years. While I trusted you. While I loved you.
while I sacrificed everything to give you whatever you wanted.
I didn't steal anything, Marcus shouted. That money was owed to me. Do you have any idea how much it cost to raise me? How much you and Dad spent on my education, my life? I was just taking what was rightfully mine. The admission hung in the air like poison. So you admit it, Isabel said softly. You took the money. Marcus seemed to realize his mistake, but it was too late. Vivian grabbed his arm, her face twisted with rage and fear. This is ridiculous, Vivian spat. You're a pathetic old woman who can't handle her own finances. Marcus was helping you, and this is how you repay him? By making up lies? The police don't think they're lies. Neither does my lawyer. Neither does the FBI agent who's investigating financial fraud cases. That was a bluff. She hadn't contacted the FBI yet, though Patricia said they might need to. But it had the desired effect. Vivian went pale. You wouldn't, Marcus said. I'm your son. You wouldn't send me to prison. And there it was, the manipulation she'd fallen for so many times before. The appeal to her love, her loyalty, her fear of losing him. But Isabel had already lost him, probably years ago. Maybe she never really had him at all. You did this to yourself, Marcus. Every choice, every theft, every lie, that was you, not me. So what, you're just gonna destroy your own son? Marcus's voice cracked, and for a moment, Isabel saw the little boy he used to be, the child who'd cried when he skinned his knee, who had hugged her tight before his first day of school. But that little boy was gone, if he'd ever truly existed. I'm not destroying you, Marcus. I'm protecting myself. There's a difference. She handed Marcus an envelope. This is from my lawyer. It revokes your power of attorney and demands full repayment of all funds taken from my accounts. You have 30 days to respond. If you don't, or if you take any more money, I'll file a police report. Marcus stared at the envelope like it was a snake. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. Mom, his voice broke on the word. Mom, please, I made mistakes, okay? I admit that, but don't do this. We can work it out. We're family. Family doesn't steal from each other. Family doesn't lie. Family doesn't trade each other like ATMs with a heartbeat. You're really going to choose money over your own son? Vivian shrieked. What kind of mother are you? The question should have hurt, but instead, Isabel felt something like relief, because she finally knew the answer. The kind who won't let herself be destroyed anymore. The kind who remembers she has value beyond her bank account. The kind who's done being small. She stepped back and closed the door on their protests, their threats, their tears. She locked it, the new lock, the one they couldn't open, and walked to the kitchen on shaking legs. Through the window, she watched them argue in the driveway. Vivian was screaming, gesturing wildly. Marcus looked broken, defeated. A part of Isabel wanted to run out there, to take it all back, to make it okay somehow. But she didn't. She stood still and watched them drive away, maybe for the last time. When the sound of their car faded, Isabel sank into a chair and let herself cry. Not for the money, though God knew that hurt, but for the son she'd loved, the relationship she'd hoped for, the family she'd wanted and would never have. She cried for all the years she'd made herself small, all the times she'd swallowed her dignity, all the moments she'd chosen peace over self-respect. And then she dried her tears, made herself a cup of tea, and called Patricia. It's done, she said. They know. How did they react? Exactly as you'd expect. Denial, anger, manipulation. I looked around my kitchen, my home, the life I'd built. Patricia, I need to know, did I do the right thing? There was a pause, and then Patricia's voice came through, firm and kind. Isabel, you did the only thing that will save your life, literally and figuratively. What happens next is up to him. After they hung up, Isabel sat in the quiet, feeling the weight of her decision settle over her like snow. Heavy, but clean. Cold, but purifying. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. I will never forgive you for this. She read it twice, then deleted it. She blocked his number, then Vivian's. Then she turned off her phone and sat in the silence of her own home, in the space she'd reclaimed, and allowed herself to simply breathe. For the first time in years, she felt like she could. Part 4. The Investigation. The next morning, Isabel woke up at 5 a.m., which was unusual. She'd been sleeping poorly for years, plagued by anxiety dreams about money and Marcus.
But this morning, she woke with a sense of purpose that felt almost foreign. She made coffee, sat at David's old desk, and spread out all the documentation Gerald had given her. In the stark light of morning, the numbers were even more devastating. $2.3 million stolen in increments carefully calculated to avoid detection. But it was the patterns that interested her now that she was looking at them with clear eyes, instead of a mother's desperate denial. The first withdrawal had happened 3 months after David's funeral. Marcus had come over, ostensibly to comfort her, and left with $50,000 for what he'd called a can't-miss investment opportunity. Isabel had been so deep in grief that she'd barely questioned it. The withdrawals had increased after that, becoming more frequent, more aggressive, and they always coincided with something. A vacation Vivian had posted about on social media, a new car appearing in their driveway, a business venture that never quite materialized. Isabel opened her laptop, something she rarely did since Marcus had always insisted on helping her with technology. Now she created new passwords for everything: her email, her bank accounts, her phone. She felt like she was building a fortress, one wall at a time. Her email was full of messages from Marcus, increasingly desperate. "Mother, please talk to me. You're making a huge mistake.
Vivian is threatening to leave me because of what you're doing. I can't believe you'd destroy our family over money." Isabel deleted them without responding. Patricia had been clear: no contact until the legal situation was resolved. But then she found something else in her email, buried in her spam folder. Messages from Marcus's business partner, someone named Robert Chen. The subject lines alone made her blood run cold. "Marcus, where's the client money? I need answers now. This is fraud, and I won't be part of it." Isabel called Patricia immediately. "I found something," she said. "Emails that suggest Marcus might have been doing this to other people, not just me." An hour later, she was in Patricia's office, watching the lawyer's face grow grimmer with each email she read. "Isabel, this is bigger than I thought," Patricia said. "If these emails are authentic, and they appear to be, your son has been running a Ponzi scheme. He's been taking money from investors, using new investments to pay returns to old investors, and skimming off the top for himself. How much? Based on these emails, potentially millions more than what he took from you." Patricia looked up, her expression serious. "We need to contact the authorities. Today." "But I wanted to give him a chance to pay me back first." "Isabel." Patricia's voice was gentle but firm. "This isn't about you anymore. There are other victims here, other people Marcus has defrauded. If we wait, he might disappear or destroy evidence. We have a moral obligation to act." Isabel felt the ground shift beneath her again. It was one thing to protect herself from her son's theft. It was another to actively participate in his prosecution. "I can't," she whispered. "He's my son." "He's a criminal," Patricia said. "And if you don't do this, someone else will. Better it comes from you, when you can control the narrative and potentially help other victims get justice." Isabel thought of David's letter, his warning about Marcus. She remembered all the Sundays she'd endured, all the condescension and demands. She thought of Vivian's mocking voice. "You're just someone who spent her life making casseroles and volunteering at church." She thought about who she'd been before she'd let fear turn her into someone so small she was almost invisible. "Make the call," Isabel said. The detective who arrived that afternoon was a woman in her 40s named Sarah Brennan, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner that reminded Isabel of her own mother. She listened to Isabel's story without interrupting, taking notes and asking clarifying questions. "How are you holding up?" Detective Brennan asked when Isabel finished. The question surprised her. No one had asked her that in years. "I don't know," Isabel said honestly. "I feel like I'm betraying him, but I also feel like I'm finally standing up." "Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense." Detective Brennan closed her notebook. "Mrs. Thornton, I want you to know something. In my 15 years working fraud cases, I've seen a lot of family situations like this. Adult children exploiting elderly parents. And the thing that always strikes me is how long the parents suffer before they report it. The guilt, the shame, the fear of being alone, it keeps them silent while the abuse continues. I'm not elderly,"
Isabel said, a bit defensively. Detective Brennan smiled. No, you're not. But you are a victim, and victims deserve justice regardless of who the perpetrator is. Over the next week, Isabel gave Detective Brennan everything: bank statements, emails, documentation of every withdrawal and transfer. She told her about the power of attorney she'd signed without understanding. She explained about the investments that never materialized, the loans that were never repaid. And she told her about the other things she'd discovered: that Marcus had taken out credit cards in her name, running up debts of over $300,000 that Isabel had known nothing about. Identity theft on top of everything else, Detective Brennan said, shaking her head. Your son is looking at serious prison time, Isabel. Federal charges. This is not a minor crime. Isabel felt sick. How long? Depends on what we find, but with the amounts involved, 5 to 10 years, possibly more. That night, Isabel couldn't sleep. She kept seeing Marcus as a child, laughing on the swings at the park. She remembered teaching him to ride a bike, holding the seat until he found his balance. She remembered his college graduation, how proud David was. Where had that boy gone? When had he become someone capable of such systematic cruelty? Her phone rang at 2 a.m, a new number, one she didn't recognize. Against her better judgment, she answered. Mother? Vivian's voice was tight, controlled. We need to talk. I have nothing to say to you. Yes, you do, because if you don't drop this investigation, I'm going to make sure everyone knows what kind of mother you are. I'm going to tell them how you abandoned Marcus, how you cared more about money than your own son. Isabel almost laughed. Go ahead, tell whoever you want. I know the truth. Do you? Do you know that Marcus is in the hospital right now? That the stress of your accusations gave him a heart attack? How do you think that's going to look when this goes to trial? Fear spiked through Isabel. Is he okay? Why do you care? You're the one who put him there. Vivian's voice dripped with venom. Drop the charges, Isabel, or I swear to God I'll make your life hell. He's already done that, Isabel said, and hung up. She immediately called Detective Brennan, who confirmed that Marcus had indeed been admitted to a hospital, but not for a heart attack, for a panic attack. It's a manipulation tactic, Detective Brennan said. He's trying to make you feel guilty. Don't fall for it. But Isabel did feel guilty. She felt like she was drowning in it. Part 5. The Discovery. 3 days later, Detective Brennan called with news that changed everything. We've been investigating Marcus's business dealings, and we found something. Can you come to the station? Isabel drove there in a fog, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tight her knuckles went white. At the station, Detective Brennan led her to a conference room where another detective waited, along with someone from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. Mrs. Thornton, I'm Agent Martinez, the FBI agent said. We've been building a case against your son for several months now, completely independent of your complaint. Isabel felt the room tilt. What? Marcus has been running a sophisticated fraud operation for at least 6 years, Agent Martinez continued. He's defrauded at least 23 people that we know of, totaling approximately $12 million. The number was incomprehensible. $12 million. We've been waiting for someone to come forward, Detective Brennan said gently. Victims of family fraud rarely report, which is why it took so long. But you reporting him gave us the leverage we needed to move forward. They showed Isabel documents, evidence, testimonies from other victims, an elderly couple who'd lost their life savings, a widow who'd trusted Marcus with her late husband's pension, a young family whose college fund for their children had disappeared into Marcus's fake investment schemes. Isabel read their stories and felt like she was going to be sick. All these people, all this pain, all this devastation, and Marcus had done it all with a smile, with charm, with the confidence that came from knowing his victims trusted him. There's something else, Agent Martinez said, pulling out another file. We've been looking into Vivian as well. She's not just a bystander in this. She's been actively involved, creating fake companies, forging documents, laundering money through various accounts. She's been using the stolen funds to maintain a lifestyle neither she nor Marcus could afford legitimately. The vacations, the cars, the designer clothes, all of it paid for with other people's money. Isabel thought of all the times Vivian had mocked her simple life, her old car, her modest clothes. The woman had been dripping in stolen wealth and had the audacity to look down on her. "What happens now?" Isabel asked. "Now we arrest them. We have enough evidence for multiple federal charges: wire fraud, money laundering, identity theft, and conspiracy. They're both looking at significant prison time." "When?" "Tomorrow morning." Isabel drove home in a daze, but this time the guilt was mixed with something else. A grim satisfaction that justice was coming. Not just for her, but for all of Marcus's victims. That night, she did something she hadn't done in years. She called her old friend, Margaret, who drifted away after Marcus had made it clear he didn't like Isabel wasting time with gossips. "Isabel?" Margaret sounded shocked. "Is that really you?" "It's me, and I need to tell you something about Marcus." About everything. They talked for 3 hours. Isabel told her everything. The theft, the manipulation, the years of abuse disguised as family obligation. She cried, she raged, she laughed at the absurdity of it all. "I'm so sorry," Margaret said. "I saw what was happening, but I didn't know how to tell you. He'd always been so controlling. Even when you two were younger, he never wanted you to have friends, to have your own life." "I should have seen it," Isabel said.
You loved him. Love makes us blind. Margaret paused. What are you going to do now? I don't know, Isabel admitted. Testify against him, I suppose? Help the other victims? Try to figure out who I am without all of this weighing on me. You're Isabel Thornton, Margaret said firmly. You're the woman who organized the entire church fundraiser single-handedly when the roof was leaking. You're the woman who taught literacy classes to immigrants at the community center. You're the woman who made the best apple pie in 3 counties. You're not defined by what your son did to you. After they hung up, Isabel sat in the dark and let those words sink in. She'd spent so many years being Marcus's mother, David's wife, that she'd forgotten she was also just Isabel, a person with value independent of her relationships. The next morning, her phone rang at 6 a.m. Detective Brennan. They arrested Marcus and Vivian an hour ago. I wanted you to hear it from me. They're being processed now. Bail hearing is this afternoon. Isabel felt numb. Okay. Isabel, there's one more thing. When they searched Marcus's house, they found documents that suggest he was planning to have you declared mentally incompetent. He'd already contacted doctors, started building a case that you were suffering from dementia. The words hit like a physical blow. What? He was going to have you institutionalized and take complete control of your assets. We found emails between him and Vivian discussing it. They were calling it the final solution. Isabel sat down hard, her legs giving out. The final solution? They'd been planning to lock her away, to take everything, to erase her completely. How long? She whispered. How long were they planning this? At least 6 months. He'd even selected a facility, one of those expensive memory care places. Ironic, considering he would have been paying for it with your own money. After Detective Brennan hung up, Isabel sat in her kitchen and stared at nothing. All those times Marcus had commented on her forgetfulness, her confusion about finances, he'd been building a narrative. Every time he'd dismissed her concerns or called her paranoid, he'd been laying groundwork. He'd been planning to bury her alive. The rage that rose in Isabel then was unlike anything she'd ever felt. It was pure, clean, righteous. She'd protected this man, sacrificed for him, loved him with every fiber of her being. And he'd been planning to lock her in a facility and throw away the key. She called Patricia. I want to testify, Isabel said. I want to stand up in court and tell everyone exactly what he did. I want him to see my face when I do it. Are you sure? Patricia asked. It won't be easy. His lawyer will try to make you look bad, claim you're a bitter mother who... I'm sure, Isabel interrupted. For the first time in years, I'm completely sure about something. Part 6, the trial.
The bail hearing was surreal. Isabel sat in the courtroom, flanked by Patricia and Detective Brennan, and watched her son shuffle in wearing an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs. He looked diminished, smaller somehow, his expensive suit and confident swagger replaced by prison-issue clothing and fear. He saw her and his face crumbled. "Mom," he mouthed. Isabel looked away.
Marcus's lawyer argued for bail. He was a respected member of the community, a low flight risk, had ties to the area. The prosecutor countered with the evidence: 12 million in fraud, multiple victims, attempts to conceal assets, plans to flee the country. They'd found plane tickets to Brazil in Vivian's purse when she was arrested, one-way tickets for both of them scheduled for the following week. The judge denied bail. As Marcus was led away, he turned and shouted at Isabel, "This is your fault! You destroyed me! You destroyed our family!" The courtroom erupted. The judge banged his gavel. Isabel sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, and felt nothing but a cold, settled certainty that she'd made the right choice. Outside the courtroom, she was mobbed by reporters. Patricia tried to shield her, but Isabel stopped her. "I'll talk to them," she said. She stood in front of the cameras, this 62-year-old woman in her simple dress, and told the truth. "My son stole from me," she said clearly. "He stole from many people. He betrayed every trust, violated every relationship, and destroyed lives in pursuit of money and status. I loved him. I still love him, but love doesn't mean enabling someone to hurt others. Love doesn't mean sacrificing yourself on the altar of someone else's greed." The clip went viral within hours. By evening, Isabel's phone was ringing constantly with media requests. She ignored them all, except one: a call from a woman named Jennifer Wu, who identified herself as one of Marcus's victims. "I just wanted to thank you," Jennifer said, her voice thick with tears. "I'm 78 years old and your son took everything I had. I was too ashamed to report it. But seeing you stand up to him, seeing you tell the truth even though he's your son, it gave me the courage to come forward too." Isabel listened to Jennifer's story, a tale heartbreakingly similar to her own. Marcus had befriended Jennifer after her husband died, offered to manage her investments, and systematically drained her accounts over 2 years. When Jennifer had questioned him, he told her she was confused, that her grief was making her paranoid. "I almost believed him. I almost let him convince me I was losing my mind. But you showed me that I'm not crazy. He's a predator, and you stopped him." After they hung up, Isabel cried. Not for Marcus this time, but for Jennifer, for all the victims, for all the people whose trust had been weaponized against them. Over the next few weeks, more victims came forward. The elderly couple who'd lost their life savings contacted Patricia. The widow reached out through Detective Brennan. A support group formed, people Marcus had victimized, and they asked Isabel to join them. She did. She sat in a church basement with 17 other people and listened to their stories. Some were wealthier than her, some poorer. Some were old, some young. But they all shared the same wound: the betrayal of trust, the violation of believing someone cared about them when they were really just marks. "How did you find the strength to report him?" one man asked Isabel. His name was Thomas, and Marcus had stolen the money Thomas had been saving to pay for his daughter's medical treatments. "Knowing he's your son, how did you do it?" Isabel thought about the question carefully. "I stopped making myself small," she said finally. "I spent years believing that my job was to make everyone else comfortable, even at the expense of my own well-being. I thought being a good mother meant never saying no, never setting boundaries, never protecting myself. But that's not love. That's self-destruction." She looked around the room at these wounded people, these survivors. "We all made ourselves small for him," she continued. "We all believed that our trust, our kindness, our generosity, that those things made us weak. But they don't. Marcus is weak. We're strong. We survived him. And now we're going to make sure no one else has to." The trial began in early December, 6 months after Marcus's arrest. The prosecution had built a comprehensive case with evidence so overwhelming that Marcus's lawyer advised him to take a plea deal. Marcus refused. "My mother is lying," he told reporters on the courthouse steps. "This is a vendetta. She's always been jealous of my success, and now she's trying to destroy me." Isabel watched the clip and felt something break inside her. The last fragile thread of hope that Marcus might acknowledge what he'd done, might show some remorse, might finally be the son she'd wanted him to be. That hope died, and in its place grew something harder, stronger. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Isabel testified on the 5th day, walking to the stand with her head high despite her shaking hands. Marcus's lawyer tried to rattle her, asking about her age, her understanding of finances, suggesting she was confused or vindictive. Isabel answered every question calmly, clearly, her voice never wavering. "Did you love your son?" the lawyer asked, as if it were a trap. "Yes," Isabel said. "I loved him enough to stop him from hurting other people. I loved him enough to tell the truth." She looked directly at Marcus then, forcing him to meet her eyes. "I loved you enough to be your mother, not your victim." Marcus looked away first. When the prosecution showed the emails Marcus and Vivian had exchanged, the ones discussing how to have Isabel declared incompetent, how to finally get control of the old woman's money, how Isabel was too stupid to know what was happening, the courtroom went silent. Isabel watched the jury's faces shift from neutral observation to disgust. She watched Marcus slump in his chair. She watched Vivian dab at tears that looked suspiciously strategic, and she felt nothing but relief that she'd escaped. The verdict came on a Tuesday afternoon. Guilty on all counts: wire fraud, money laundering, identity theft, elder abuse, conspiracy. Vivian was convicted as well, though she immediately began cooperating with prosecutors, turning on Marcus in hopes of a reduced sentence. The judge scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later. Isabel went home that night and opened a bottle of wine David had been saving for a special occasion. She poured herself a glass, raised it to his photo on the mantel, and said, "I did it. I stood up for myself. I wish you were here to see it." She drank the wine slowly, sitting in the quiet of her home, and allowed herself to feel everything: the grief, the anger, the loss, the victory. It was all tangled together, impossible to separate. Her phone buzzed. A text from Margaret. "Proud of you, friend. Dinner tomorrow?" Another text from Jennifer Wu. "You saved my life. Thank you." A message from Patricia. "You were magnificent today. Rest now." Isabel looked at the messages and realized something profound. She wasn't alone. She'd thought that standing up to Marcus meant losing her family, becoming isolated. But she'd actually found something better: a community of people who respected her, supported her, saw her more than just a source of money or obligation. She'd found herself. Part 7. Sentencing. The sentencing hearing was packed. All of Marcus's victims were there, filling the gallery, some of them preparing to give impact statements. Isabel sat in the front row, her hands folded, her face calm. Marcus was brought in looking gaunt and defeated. 2 months in jail awaiting sentencing had stripped away the last vestiges of his arrogance. He looked like what he was: a middle-aged man facing the consequences of his choices. The judge began with the facts. Marcus had stolen over $15 million from 29 victims. He'd shown no remorse, had attempted to obstruct justice, and had violated the trust of vulnerable people, including his own mother. The crimes were calculated, systematic, and devastating. "Does the defendant wish to make a statement?" the judge asked. Marcus stood, his lawyer beside him. For a long moment, he said nothing, just stared at the floor. Then he looked up, and his eyes found Isabel. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Isabel waited for the manipulation, for the excuse, for the justification,
But Marcus just stood there, tears running down his face, looking more broken than she'd ever seen him. "I don't know what happened to me," he continued. "I don't know when I became this person, but I know I hurt you. I hurt everyone, and I'm sorry." It was the first genuine emotion Isabel had seen from him in years, maybe decades. She wanted to believe it was real, that he'd finally broken through his own delusion and seen himself clearly. But even if it was real, it didn't change anything. The impact statements began. Jennifer Wu, her voice shaking, described how Marcus's theft had forced her to sell her home and move in with her daughter. Thomas talked about his daughter's medical bills going unpaid, the treatments delayed, the suffering Marcus's greed had caused. One by one, Marcus's victims stood and testified to the damage he'd done, not just financially, but emotionally, psychologically. He'd made them doubt themselves, feel ashamed, believe they were stupid or crazy.
Then it was Isabel's turn. She walked to the podium slowly, aware that everyone in the courtroom was watching. She'd prepared a statement, but when she got there, she put her notes aside. "I'm Marcus's mother," she began, "and I want to be clear about something. I still love my son. I probably always will. That's what makes this so hard." She looked at Marcus, who was crying openly now. "But love isn't enough," Isabel continued. "Love without respect is just a cage that we lock ourselves in. For years, I loved my son by making myself smaller. I loved him by sacrificing my dignity, my security, my sense of self. I loved him by enabling his worst impulses and pretending they were somehow my fault." Her voice grew stronger. "Marcus didn't just steal my money. He stole my confidence, my peace of mind, my ability to trust my own judgment. He made me believe that my only value was in what I could give him. And when I finally stood up for myself, he tried to have me declared incompetent and locked away." She paused, gathering herself. "I hope my son gets help in prison. I hope he uses this time to figure out how he became someone who could hurt so many people. But mostly, I hope that everyone watching this understands something. It's never too late to stand up for yourself. It's never too late to say no more. It's never too late to remember that you matter." Isabel looked at the judge. "Whatever sentence you give my son, I'll support it. Because justice isn't about revenge. It's about making sure this never happens again. It's about protecting the next person he might have victimized. And it's about all of us, all his victims, finally being able to move forward." She returned to her seat in complete silence. No one in the courtroom moved. The judge took a long moment before speaking. "Mr. Thornton," he said, "you have committed some of the most egregious breaches of trust I've seen in my 20 years on the bench. You targeted vulnerable people, including your own mother, and you showed no remorse until today, when facing the consequences finally became unavoidable. Your crimes were calculated, sophisticated, and devastating." He paused. "I'm sentencing you to 15 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for the first 7 years. Additionally, you will be required to pay full restitution to all victims, and you will be permanently barred from working in any financial capacity." Marcus's knees buckled. His lawyer caught him. "Miss Thornton," he said, addressing Vivian, who was sentenced separately, "you enabled and participated in these crimes. I'm sentencing you to 8 years, with restitution obligations identical to your ex-husband's." Ex-husband. Vivian had filed for divorce the day after her conviction, trying to protect whatever assets she'd hidden away. It was over. Part 8. Reconstruction. The months after the sentencing were strange. Isabel had built her life around Marcus's demands for so long that she didn't know what to do with her freedom. She woke up some mornings and automatically started worrying about what he might need, what crisis might be brewing, what new manipulation was coming.
Then she remembered. He was in prison. He couldn't touch her anymore. The realization was both liberating and disorienting. Patricia helped her navigate the restitution process. Of the 15 million Marcus had stolen, they recovered about 8 million from hidden accounts and liquidated assets. It wasn't everything, but the victims were grateful for anything. Isabel received back about 60% of what Marcus had taken from her, enough to secure her future, though not what she'd had before. She found she didn't mind it as much as she thought she would. Money was just money. Peace was priceless. She reconnected with old friends, people she'd drifted away from during Marcus's years of control. Margaret became a constant presence again, as did several other women from Isabel's past. They had coffee dates, went to movies, took a weekend trip to the coast. "You seem different," Margaret said one afternoon as they walked along the beach. "Lighter, somehow." "I am," Isabel said. "It's like I was carrying this enormous weight and didn't even realize until I put it down." She started volunteering again, this time at an organization that helped fraud victims navigate the legal system and rebuild their lives. She used her experience to guide others, showing them that recovery was possible, that they weren't alone. Jennifer Wu became a close friend. They met for lunch once a week, two women who'd survived the same predator and come out stronger for it. "Do you regret it?" Jennifer asked one day, turning him in. "No," Isabel said without hesitation. "I regret not doing it sooner. I regret all the years I made myself small. But standing up for myself, that's the best thing I've ever done." She sold her house. It held too many painful memories, and bought a smaller place closer to town. It was a fresh start, a clean slate, a home that was entirely hers, without David's ghost or Marcus's shadow. She took up painting, something she'd loved as a young woman, but had abandoned when Marcus was born. Her small studio filled with canvases, abstract pieces full of color and movement and emotion. "These are remarkable," the woman at the local gallery said when Isabel nervously brought some in. "Would you consider showing them?" Isabel's first art show opened on a Saturday in April, 1 year after Marcus's conviction. She stood in the gallery, surrounded by her work, and felt something she hadn't felt in decades: pride. Margaret came, and Jennifer, and Detective Brennan. Patricia brought her wife. Thomas came with his daughter, who was healthy now, her treatments complete. One by one, Marcus's other victims arrived. This unlikely family forged from shared trauma and survival. "To Isabel," Margaret said, raising a glass of champagne, "to who taught us all that it's never too late to become who you're meant to be." They toasted, and Isabel felt tears prick her eyes, happy tears this time, clean and uncomplicated. That night, alone in her studio, she started a new painting. She didn't know what it would become yet, but she knew what she wanted to call it. The Woman Who Remembered How to Fly. Part 9. The Letter. 18 months into a sentence, Marcus wrote to Isabel. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, forwarded by Patricia with a note, "You don't have to read this if you don't want to. Your choice." Isabel held the envelope for a long time, feeling its weight. Part of her wanted to throw it away unread, to maintain the boundary she'd established, to protect herself from more manipulation. But another part, the part that had loved the little boy he used to be, needed to know what he had to say. She opened it. "Dear Mom,
I know I don't have the right to write to you. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I need to say some things, even if you never respond. I've spent the last 1.5 years in therapy, trying to understand how I became the person who could do what I did to you, to everyone. The easy answer is that I'm a sociopath, a monster, someone fundamentally broken. But the truth is more complicated, and somehow worse. I made choices. Every single time, I made a choice. I chose to take your money. I chose to lie. I chose to manipulate you. I told myself stories, that you owed me, that it wasn't really stealing, that I'd pay you back eventually. But they were just stories I told myself to avoid facing what I was really doing. You asked me once, when I stopped loving you as a mother and started seeing you as a bank account. I've been thinking about that question. I think it was gradual, so slow I didn't notice it happening.
First, I took for granted everything you gave me. Then I started expecting it. Then I started demanding it. And somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing you as a person at all, just as a resource to be exploited. The worst part is that you tried to tell me. You tried to set boundaries. You tried to make me see what I was doing. And I punished you for it every time. I made you feel guilty for caring about yourself. I weaponized your love for me. In here, I've met other guys who did what I did. Fraud, theft, betrayal. And almost all of us have the same story. There was someone who loved us too much, who we learned we could exploit, who we trained to accept less and less until they were accepting everything. You breaking that pattern saved my life, Mom. Not metaphorically, literally. I was spiraling into something darker. The plan to have you declared incompetent wasn't the end. Vivian and I had discussed other options. Options I can't even write down because they make me sick to think about now. You stopped me before I became someone even worse. You stopped me from doing something I could never come back from. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I'm not asking you to visit or write back or have anything to do with me. You've earned your peace, and I won't disturb it. I just wanted you to know that the last thing you said to me, that I did this to myself, was absolutely right. And I wanted you to know that I'm glad you stood up for yourself. I'm glad you didn't let me destroy you. I hope you're happy, Mom. I hope you've built a life that makes you proud. I hope you never think about me at all. I love you. I'm sorry. Those words don't mean much coming from me, but they're true. Marcus. My name is Isabel Thornton, she began, and I'm here to tell you that it's never too late to stand up for yourself. She told her story, not just the facts, but the feelings, the fear, the guilt, the shame, the years of making herself small, the moment she decided to stop. We're taught that family comes first, that we should sacrifice for the people we love. And that's true to a point. But sacrifice becomes self-destruction when the other person is taking advantage of us. And love becomes enabling when we're protecting someone from the consequences of their own actions. She looked around the room at the faces watching her, faces marked by pain, by betrayal, by the slow realization that someone they loved had used that love as a weapon. You are not responsible for other people's choices. You are not obligated to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. You are not required to shrink yourself to make someone else feel bigger. She paused, letting the words sink in. I spent years believing that my value came from what I could give to others, and my son learned to exploit that belief until there was almost nothing left of me. But here's what I know now. Your value is intrinsic. It doesn't depend on anyone else's recognition of it. It doesn't depend on how much you give or how small you make yourself. You matter simply because you exist. The applause was thunderous. Afterward, people lined up to talk to her, to share their stories, to ask for advice. Isabel listened to each one, offering what wisdom she'd earned through her own painful journey. One woman, probably in her 70s, gripped Isabel's hand with surprising strength. My daughter has been stealing from me for 15 years. I knew deep down, but I couldn't admit it. After hearing you speak, I'm going to do something about it. Finally. It won't be easy, Isabel said gently, but you're worth protecting. Remember that. The woman nodded, tears in her eyes. I will. Thank you.
This had become Isabel's mission, speaking at support groups, writing articles, appearing on podcasts. She'd even started a small nonprofit called Second Flight, dedicated to helping fraud victims rebuild their lives and reclaim their independence. The name came from something Margaret had said. You're like a bird that forgot how to fly, Isabel, but you remembered, and now you're teaching others. Second Flight provided legal resources, therapy referrals, financial education, and most importantly, community. The shame and isolation that came with being victimized by family was crushing. But knowing you weren't alone, that others had survived and thrived, that changed everything. Jennifer Wu was on the board. Thomas volunteered as a counselor.
Detective Brennan sat on their advisory committee. They'd all taken their trauma and transformed it into purpose. Isabel's days were full now in a way they'd never been when she was just waiting for Marcus's Sunday visits, just existing to be available for his demands. She had work that mattered, relationships that nourished her, a life that felt authentically hers. She'd even started dating, which surprised her. A gentle widower named Robert, who lost his wife to cancer 3 years ago. They met at an art gallery, bonding over a painting they both loved. He had kind eyes and listened more than he talked, and never, ever pressured her for anything. "I like taking things slow," he'd said on their third date. "I'm not in any hurry. I just enjoy your company." What a revelation that was, that a man could enjoy her company without wanting something from her, without seeing her as a means to an end. They went to movies, took long walks, had dinners where they talked about everything and nothing. It was easy and light and uncomplicated. Isabel didn't know if it would become something more serious, but she wasn't worried about it. She was just enjoying the moment, enjoying being seen and valued for who she was. On her 65th birthday, 3 years after that last painful Sunday with Marcus, Isabel threw herself a party. Not a big one, just her closest friends, the people who'd stood by her, who'd watched her transformation, who loved the woman she'd become. They gathered in her backyard, under string lights she'd hung herself, eating food from her favorite restaurants, because she'd finally stopped feeling guilty about not cooking everything from scratch. "Beach!" Margaret called out, raising her glass. Isabel stood, looking around at these faces she loved. Margaret and Jennifer, Robert and Patricia, Thomas and his daughter, Detective Brennan and her partner. Her chosen family, the people who'd helped her remember who she was.
3 years ago, Isabel said, I was a different person. I was small and scared and convinced that my only value was in what I could give to others. I let myself be exploited, diminished, almost erased. She raised her glass. But I survived. We all survived. And more than that, we thrived. We took our pain and turned it into purpose. We took our fear and turned it into strength. We took our smallness and expanded until we filled the whole sky. She looked at each person, meeting their eyes. Thank you for being part of my flight. Thank you for reminding me that I could soar. Thank you for showing me that it's never too late to become who you're meant to be. To Isabel, they chorused, and the sound of their voices filled her with a joy so complete it was almost overwhelming. Later, as the party wound down and people began to leave, Robert stayed behind to help clean up. They worked in comfortable silence, loading the dishwasher, putting away chairs. "Can I ask you something?" Robert said suddenly. "Of course." "Do you ever regret it, standing up to your son, the price you had to pay?" Isabel thought about the question seriously. She thought about the son she'd lost, or rather, the son she'd never really had. She thought about the money, the time, the years she couldn't get back. But then, she thought about who she'd become, the work she was doing, the peace she felt, the life she'd built from the ashes of her old one. "No," she said, simply. "The only thing I regret is not doing it sooner." Robert nodded, understanding in his eyes. "You're remarkable, you know that?" Isabel smiled. A few years ago, she would have deflected the compliment, minimized herself, found a way to make it about someone else. But now she just said, "Thank you, I am." Because she was. She was remarkable. She was strong, she was free, and she was flying. Epilogue. 5 years later. Isabel sat in her studio putting the finishing touches on a painting for her upcoming exhibition. At 67, she'd become something she never expected, a successful artist. Her work sold well, but more importantly, it meant something. People told her they saw themselves in her paintings, saw their own journeys from darkness into light. Outside her window, she could see the garden she'd planted, now mature and beautiful. Roses climbed the trellis, tomatoes ripened on the vine, birds sang in the trees she'd carefully chosen and placed. Everything here was hers. Everything here was intentional. Her phone buzzed. A text from Margaret. Lunch today? New place by the river? Another from Jennifer. Board meeting still on for Thursday? I have big news. Another from Robert. Thinking of you. See you tonight? Her life was full. Not in the suffocating way it had been when she was always on call for Marcus's needs, always anxious about the next crisis, but full in a good way, with people who loved her for herself, with work that fed her soul, with days that belonged entirely to her. She had occasional news of Marcus over the years. He was apparently a model prisoner, teaching financial literacy classes to other inmates, the irony of which wasn't lost on anyone. He'd completed multiple therapy programs. He'd earned a degree in social work. Whether his transformation was genuine, Isabel didn't know, and didn't particularly care. She hoped he'd changed. She hoped he'd found some peace. But it wasn't her responsibility anymore. She'd learned something crucial. You could love someone and still not let them destroy you. You could forgive someone and still maintain boundaries. You could wish someone well while keeping them at a distance. Isabel finished the painting, a woman with wings spread wide, soaring above a landscape that was both beautiful and slightly wild. She signed it with a flourish, then stepped back to admire it. Yes, this was it. This captured everything she wanted to say about her journey, about transformation, about the moment you stop making yourself small and remember that you were always meant to take up space. She titled it The Price of Silence, because silence had cost her almost everything, but finding her voice had given her the world. That evening, Robert came over for dinner. They cooked together, moving around her kitchen in the easy rhythm they'd developed over the past few years. He was talking about a book he'd read, and she was half listening, half watching the way the evening light caught his profile.
You're staring, he said, amused. I'm appreciating, Isabel corrected. There's a difference. After dinner, they sat on her porch with wine, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. Robert reached over and took her hand, and Isabel laced her fingers through his, marveling at how safe it felt, how uncomplicated. I love you, you know, Robert said quietly. I've been wanting to say it for a while, but I didn't want to rush you. Isabel turned to look at him, this kind man who'd waited so patiently, who'd never pressured her, who'd let her heal at her own pace. I love you too, she said, and realized it was true. Not the desperate, clinging love she'd felt for Marcus, where she'd lost herself in trying to save him, but a healthy love, a grown-up love, a love that made room for both of them to be fully themselves. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank below the horizon, and Isabel thought about how far she'd come. From the woman who'd hidden in her kitchen, waiting for her son's demands, to this, a woman with her own life, her own purpose, her own love. She thought about all the people she'd helped through Second Flight, all the victims who'd found the courage to stand up for themselves, all the lives that had been transformed because she'd chosen to stop being silent. She thought about the little girl she'd been, full of dreams and ambitions, and the young woman who'd set those dreams aside to be a wife and mother. She thought about David, who'd wanted her to be happy, to be strong, to protect herself. I did it, she whispered to his memory. I'm finally free. The stars began to emerge, one by one, pinpricks of light in the darkening sky. Isabel watched them appear, these distant suns that had been there all along, just waiting to be seen, like her own strength, like her own value, like her own wings. They'd been there all along. She'd just forgotten. But she remembered now, and she would never forget again. The end. Afterward. Letters to women who need them. Letter 1. To the woman reading this in secret. You're reading this on your phone, or maybe you borrowed it from the library, and you'll return it before anyone notices. You're reading it in stolen moments, when he's not watching, when they're not asking for something. You see yourself in Isabel's story. Maybe your situation isn't exactly the same. Maybe it's not your son, but your daughter. Maybe it's your husband, your sister, your parent. Maybe the amount is smaller or larger. Maybe it's been happening for 5 years or 25 years. But you recognize the feeling, that sinking sensation in your stomach when they call, that automatic reach for your wallet before they even finish asking, that voice in your head that says, just one more time, then I'll set boundaries. That exhaustion that settles into your bones because you're always bracing for the next demand. You recognize the shame, the secret you keep from friends because you're afraid they'll think you're weak or stupid. The lies you tell yourself about why this time is different, why this loan will be the last one, why if you just love them enough, they'll change.
Here's what I want you to know. You are not alone. You are not weak. You are not stupid. You are someone who loves deeply, and someone learned to exploit that love. That's not your fault. The exploitation is never the victim's fault. But, and this is important, staying in this situation now that you see it clearly, that becomes a choice. Not an easy choice, not a simple choice, not a choice without consequences, but a choice nonetheless. Isabel stayed for years after she started suspecting something was wrong. She made excuses. She convinced herself she was imagining things. She prioritized keeping the peace over protecting herself. Till one day, she didn't. What changed? Not Marcus. He kept getting worse. Not her financial situation. That kept deteriorating. What changed was Isabel's willingness to be small. She decided that her peace mattered, that her security mattered, that she mattered. You matter. Read that again, out loud if you can. You matter. Not because of what you can give, not because of how much you sacrifice, not because of how many times you say yes when you want to say no. You matter because you're human, because you have value that exists independent of anyone else's recognition of it. Because your life, your well-being, your future, they count. I know you're scared. I know you're thinking of all the reasons you can't do what Isabel did. The family will turn on you. The person will be devastated. Everyone will think you're cruel. You'll be alone.
But here's the truth. You're already alone. The person exploiting you isn't keeping you company. They're keeping you small. And the family members who would turn on you for protecting yourself, they were never really on your side to begin with. Real love doesn't require you to destroy yourself. Real family doesn't treat you like an ATM. Real relationships have reciprocity, respect, and boundaries. What you have right now isn't love. It's extraction. So what do? First, acknowledge the truth. Stop making excuses for them. Stop reframing their exploitation as need. Stop convincing yourself that things will get better if you just give a little more. Second, document everything. Bank statements, text messages, emails, loan agreements, everything. Not because you're definitely going to take legal action, but because having evidence gives you options. Third, talk to someone, a therapist, a lawyer, a financial advisor, a trusted friend, someone outside the situation who can give you perspective and support. Break the silence that's keeping you trapped. Fourth, make a plan. What would it look like to set boundaries? What would it take to say no? What resources do you need? What's the worst case scenario, and can you survive it? The answer is almost always yes. Fifth, take one small step. Just one. Maybe it's opening a separate bank account they don't know about. Maybe it's saying no to one request. Maybe it's just admitting out loud, this isn't okay. One step, then another, then another. You don't have to do everything at once. You don't have to be as brave as Isabel was in court. You just have to be brave enough to take the next right step. And here is what I promise you. It gets better. Not immediately, not easily. There will be hard days, guilt, grief, fear. There will be people who don't understand, who judge you, who take their side. But there will also be peace, relief, freedom. The slow, beautiful rebuilding of a life that's actually yours. There will be mornings when you wake up without that stone of dread in your stomach. There will be evenings when you can enjoy dinner without checking your phone every 5 minutes. There will be a moment, maybe months from now, maybe years, when you realize you're happy, actually happy, not just going through the motions, not just surviving, but genuinely, thoroughly happy. That moment is worth fighting for. You are worth fighting for. So stop reading in secret. Stop hiding this book like it's evidence of rebellion. Stop shrinking yourself to fit into someone else's comfort zone. Stand up. Speak up. Take up space. Remember how to fly. Letter 2. To the children of Isabels, you're angry right now. Your mother, your father, your aunt, your grandmother, someone you've been taking from, someone you've been using, they've finally said no. They've set boundaries. Maybe they've even taken legal action against you. And you're furious. How dare they? Don't they know you needed that money? Don't they understand the pressure you're under? Don't they care about family? You're telling yourself, and anyone who will listen, that they're selfish, cruel, that they've changed, that they've been turned against you by bad influences. Here's what you need to hear, what Marcus eventually learned in prison. You did this to yourself, not them, you. Every time you took money you didn't earn, that was your choice. Every time you manipulated someone's love for you into a transaction, that was your choice. Every time you made them feel guilty for having boundaries, that was your choice. You told yourself stories, that you deserved it, that they owed you, that you'd pay them back eventually, that they could afford it, that it wasn't really stealing because they were family. But those were lies. Comfortable lies that let you avoid facing what you were really doing. You were exploiting someone who loved you. You took their kindness and mistook it for weakness. You took their generosity and interpreted it as obligation. You took their love and weaponized it against them. And now you're facing consequences. And you hate it. Good. You should hate it. Consequences are supposed to be uncomfortable. That's how they work. But you have a choice now. You can do what Marcus initially did, deny, deflect, blame everyone but yourself. You can spend years in bitterness, convincing yourself you're the victim here. Or you can do what Marcus eventually did. Accept responsibility. That doesn't mean your victim will forgive you. Isabel forgave Marcus, but she didn't reconcile with him. Forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same thing. It doesn't mean everything goes back to normal. It won't. You broke something that can't be repaired, and that's something you'll have to live with. It doesn't mean you can manipulate your way back in with apologies and promises. They've heard it all before. Words mean nothing anymore. Only sustained, changed behavior over years, not weeks, not months, but years, might begin to rebuild a fraction of what you destroyed. What accepting responsibility does mean is this. You stop making it worse. You stop harassing them. You stop trying to make them feel guilty. You stop recruiting family members to your side. You stop spreading lies about them. You stop every single manipulative tactic you've been using. You leave them alone. You let them heal. You focus on yourself, on figuring out how you became someone capable of hurting the people who loved you most, on getting therapy, on developing empathy, on learning to build relationships based on mutual respect instead of extraction. This is hard work. It's humbling work. It means facing some ugly truths about yourself, but it's the only path forward that has any integrity. Maybe years from now, after you've genuinely changed and they've completely healed, there might be some small relationship possible. Not the old one, that's dead and buried, but something new, built on honesty and healthy boundaries. Or maybe not. Maybe they'll decide they're better off without you in their life at all. And you'll have to accept that because that's their right. You don't get to decide what they owe you. You used up those privileges when you betrayed their trust. The best thing you can do now, the only thing you can do now, is become someone who would never do this to another person. Someone who understands that love isn't ownership, that family isn't an excuse for abuse, that needing money doesn't justify theft. Become someone who, if you could go back in time, you'd be ashamed to meet. That's not easy. It might be the hardest thing you ever do, but it's also the only way you'll ever be able to live with yourself. The person you hurt isn't small anymore. They've grown, expanded, learned to fly. The question is, will you grow too? Or will you stay exactly where you are, bitter and small and trapped in your own selfishness? The choice, for once, is entirely yours. Choose wisely. Letter 3. To the family members who say, but it's family. You're uncomfortable right now. Your sister, your aunt, your mother, someone in your family has finally stood up to someone else in your family, and it's making everything awkward. There are sides being drawn, tension at gatherings, difficult conversations, and you wish everyone would just get along. You wish the victim would just let it go. You wish they'd be the bigger person, forgive and forget. Stop making things so difficult for everyone. After all, it's family. Here's what you need to understand. It's family is not a magic phrase that erases abuse. Let me ask you something. If a stranger stole thousands of dollars from your loved one, would you tell them to just forgive and forget? If a stranger manipulated them, lied to them, systematically exploited them for years, would you say, just let it go? Of course not. You'd be outraged. You'd support them pressing charges. You'd call the stranger a criminal. But because the perpetrator is family, suddenly the victim is supposed to just accept it? Suddenly protecting themselves makes them the bad guy? That's not how morality works. Family doesn't make exploitation okay. Family doesn't make theft acceptable. Family doesn't mean you're obligated to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. In fact, family makes it worse, because when family betrays you, they're not just stealing your money or your peace. They're stealing your trust, your sense of safety, your foundation. When family exploits you, they're using the deepest love you have as a weapon against you. So when you say, but it's family, what you're really saying is, your pain is less important than my comfort. Your need for justice is less important than my desire for easy family gatherings. Your boundaries are less important than maintaining the status quo. Is that really what you mean? Because if it is, you need to sit with that. You need to ask yourself why you're prioritizing a peaceful surface over actual justice. Why you're more concerned with appearances than with right and wrong. Here's what's actually happening when you pressure a victim to reconcile. You're telling them their well-being doesn't matter. You're telling them they should accept abuse for the sake of convenience. You're telling them they're the problem for having boundaries. You're making yourself complicit in their exploitation. And you're revealing something about yourself, that you're more interested in avoiding discomfort than in supporting someone who's been hurt. That's not love. That's not family loyalty. That's cowardice dressed up as peacemaking. Real family support means standing with the person who's been hurt, even when it's inconvenient. It means respecting their boundaries, even when it makes gatherings awkward. It means believing them when they tell you they've been exploited, even if the perpetrator seems nice to you. It means understanding that sometimes cutting off a toxic family member is the healthiest thing someone can do, and that your job isn't to pressure them to reconcile, but to support them in their healing. You don't have to choose sides. You can maintain relationships with both people if you want, though you should understand that might hurt the victim even more. But what you cannot do, what you have no right to do, is pressure the victim to accept continued abuse for your comfort. If you can't support their boundaries, then at minimum, stay silent. Don't add to their burden with your guilt trips and your but family platitudes. And maybe examine why someone else's healthy boundaries make you so uncomfortable. Is it because you're afraid you might be next? Is it because you've been benefiting from their exploitation too? Is it because you're afraid of what it means about your own choices? Whatever it is, that's your work to do, not theirs. The person who's been hurt has done enough work. They've carried enough burden. They've sacrificed enough. Now it's their turn to fly. Your job is to either support them or get out of the way. Choose wisely. Letter 4. To the Isabel of the future. Dear woman reading this 10, 20, 30 years from now, I don't know what the world looks like where you are. Maybe the technology has changed. Maybe the language has evolved. Maybe the details of daily life are completely different from what I know in 2025. But I know this. There are still Marcuses in your world. There are still people who exploit the love of others. There are still family members who take and take and take until there's nothing left. And there are still Isabels, still people who've made themselves small, still people who've forgotten how to fly. If you're one of them, I want you to know this pattern is not new, and you're not alone. For as long as humans have existed, there have been people who learned to manipulate love into obligation. And for just as long, there have been people who learned to break free. The details change, the amounts, the methods, the technology used to exploit, but the core dynamic remains the same. Someone vulnerable, someone who exploits that vulnerability, and a moment of choice. Your moment might be different from Isabel's. Maybe there's no courtroom in your story. Maybe the theft is emotional rather than financial. Maybe the person you need to stand up to isn't family at all. But the principle remains. You have the right to protect yourself. You have the right to say no. You have the right to take up space. Those rights don't depend on the era you live in, or the technology available, or the specific circumstances of your situation. They're inherent. They're yours. They always have been. I hope your world has better systems for protecting people like Isabel. I hope there are more resources, more support, more understanding that being victimized by family is particularly devastating. But even if there aren't, even if you're reading this in a world that still prioritizes keeping the peace over protecting victims, know this: you still have the power to change your own story. It won't be easy. It never is. But it's possible. Isabel proved that. Thousands of women and men before her and after her proved it. And you can prove it too. Whatever you're facing, whatever keeps you small, whatever makes you believe you have no choice, that's a lie. You always have a choice. Not always a good choice, not always an easy choice, but a choice. You can choose to protect yourself. You can choose to set boundaries. You can choose to remember that you matter. You can choose to fly. And when you do, when you finally take that step, when you finally say no more, when you finally remember your own wings, you'll join a long line of people throughout history who made the same choice. You'll be part of something bigger than yourself, a tradition of survival, a legacy of strength, a community of people who refused to stay small. Welcome to flight. The air is better up here.
Final note. Resources. If you or someone you know is experiencing financial exploitation by a family member, here are steps to take. Immediate actions. Document everything. Bank statements, emails, texts, loan agreements. Secure your accounts. Change passwords. Remove unauthorized access. Contact your bank about suspicious transactions. Consider freezing your credit to prevent identity theft. Professional help. Consult a lawyer specializing in elder law or family law. Speak with a financial advisor about protecting remaining assets. Find a therapist who specializes in family trauma. Contact local adult protective services if you're over 60. Port. Join a support group for financial abuse survivors. Connect with organizations that help fraud victims.
Talk to trusted friends or family members outside the situation. Remember, you are not alone and help is available. Legal options: revoke powers of attorney, file police reports for theft or fraud, pursue civil litigation for restitution, explore restraining orders if necessary. Most importantly, trust yourself. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Your instincts about being exploited are usually right. And remember Isabel's words: it's never too late to stand up for yourself. Never. This story is dedicated to every person who's ever made themselves small for someone else's comfort, and to the moment they remembered they could fly. May you find your wings. May you remember your strength. May you take up all the space you deserve. The end.